She whispered, "I can't have kids." The cowboy smiled. "Good, I've got enough for both." She came to the ranch with nothing left to lose, a carpet bag, a broken heart, and the words, "I can't have children." The cowboy just smiled. "Good," he said. "I've got enough kids for both of us." 4 small faces watched from the Porch children who'd already lost too much. Under the Cottonwood Tree, she promised, "As long as I'm here, you'll never be alone again." But in the West, love is never simple. The law came riding with questions and papers and threats, and when the storm rolled in, they stood together, man, woman, and children, hands clasped, hearts steady. "Whatever happens," he told her, "we stand as a family." And for the first time, she believed him. Wyoming, 1886. The wind swept across the scorched plains, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and red dust that painted the horizon. The sun was sinking low, burning gold like dying fire, casting its last light upon the distant cliffs. On a lonely dirt road, an old stagecoach came to a stop. The door creaked open, and from within, a woman stepped down. Her gray dress was covered in dust, her hand gripping a worn leather bag. Her name was Eleanor Grace, a schoolteacher from the Far East who had left everything behind in search of a new beginning. Inside her, only one truth remained, a wound that had never healed. "I can't have children." Those words had driven away every man who had once looked at her kindly. They had extinguished every fragile hope of a home of belonging. But when Eleanor lifted her gaze, she saw him, Wyatt Boone, standing at the gate of a weathered ranch. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his skin bronzed by the sun, his eyes deep and weary with the kind of strength that only the West could forge. He looked at her for a long moment. No pity, no judgment, only a faint smile, dry as dust and wind, yet warm enough to shake something loose inside her. "Good," he said, his voice rough and steady. "I've got enough kids for both of us." Behind him, 4 children peeked from the porch, eyes wide and wild, each carrying a story untold. Eleanor stood frozen. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from something far more dangerous, a flicker of warmth, of hope, of life. There in that barren land where nothing soft should survive, 2 broken souls found themselves face to face, one who had stopped believing in happiness, and one who had forgotten what it felt like to dream. And in that single moment, a glance, a smile, a handful of words, the storm began. A storm of emotion, of scars not yet healed, and of love, the kind that needs no promises, only the courage to believe once more. Part 1. The House in Bennett Valley. The first afternoon at the Boone Ranch, the sun sank behind the ridge, leaving the valley bathed in a dull golden haze. The wind slipped through the old wooden shutters, making them creak like a house whispering after too many silent years without a woman's voice. Eleanor stood on the porch, her hand still clutching the worn leather bag she'd carried across half the country. Before her stretched a scene as raw as it was lonely, a small cabin with a slanted roof, a yard of cracked dry earth, and a silent horse barn bathed in fading light. In the distance came the low moan of cattle, blending with the whistle of wind through the fences. She had never seen a place like this. Everything in the West felt unforgiving, the sun, the dust, the wind, even the way people looked at you. Yet somehow, in that emptiness, she felt a strange peace. Maybe because out here no one cared about the past of a woman from the East, a woman carrying invisible scars. Wyatt Boone, the rancher, was a man of few words. Tall, broad-shouldered, steady, he moved with the unhurried precision of someone used to hard work and harder silences. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, deep, the sound of gravel and wind. "The house isn't much, but the kids are used to it. If you need anything, just ask." He called her teacher, not Mrs. Boone, not Eleanor, as if the distance between them was something he needed, though both knew that distance wouldn't last forever. Inside the cabin was plain and hollow. A long wooden table, mismatched chairs, a fireplace with the faint scent of old ashes. Smoke pine and the quiet ache of loneliness lingered in the air. On the wall hung a small framed picture of a woman, gentle eyes, golden hair, a warm smile. Eleanor didn't need to ask who she was. Clara, the late wife. That evening the children appeared one by one, Eli, the eldest 11, with eyes too old for his age. Mara, 9, fiery and stubborn. Tommy, 7, loud and endlessly curious. And June, just 4, quiet, wide-eyed, watching everything. When Eleanor introduced herself, none of them spoke. They just stared. They didn't believe her. Every woman who had come before had promised to stay, and everyone had left. She could see it in Eli's gaze, the look of someone already tired of goodbyes, already a protector. "I'm here to teach you," Eleanor said softly. "But if you'd like, I can tell stories before bed, too." Silence. Only Wyatt's presence behind her arms crossed, half guarding, half listening. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Eleanor sat by the lamp with her old Emerson book. The flame trembled, casting gold ripples across her auburn hair, the last echo of sunset lingering inside. The wind moaned outside. The house, though quiet, seemed to breathe. The door opened gently. Wyatt stepped in, bringing the scent of smoke and cold air. He set down a cup. "Not coffee," he murmured. "The kids said you liked tea." She smiled faintly, said nothing. He lingered a few seconds, then turned to leave. But as he did, she caught his reflection in the window, eyes shadowed and deep, carrying the kind of sorrow that makes a man afraid to believe again. The days passed slowly. Eleanor began teaching in the kitchen, turning it into a small, makeshift schoolhouse. Mara resisted every lesson. Tommy chattered non-stop. Eli watched in silence, and little June drew circles in the dirt. Teaching them wasn't easy. Each child was a story, a wound. But Eleanor was patient, not because she had to be, but because love was the only thing left she still knew how to give. Bit by bit, things shifted. Mara started reading aloud. Tommy waited eagerly for story time. Eli helped carry water. Only Wyatt stayed distant, leaving early, coming home after dark, eating in silence. One night, long after the children had gone to bed, Eleanor heard hoofbeats outside. Through the window, she saw Wyatt standing alone by the fence, his hat in his hands, shoulders bowed under invisible weight. He sank to one knee, and through the hum of the night, she heard his voice, low, trembling, breaking through the wind. "Clara, I kept my promise. I stayed. But I don't know what to do anymore." Eleanor froze. That was how he prayed, not to God, but to the woman he'd lost, to the ghost that still lingered in every corner of this house. Moonlight fell over him, silvering the lines on his face, the face of a man who had loved too deeply and paid too high a price. When he finally rose and turned away, Eleanor knew one truth. If love were ever to be born in this place, it would have to walk through the ghosts first. She stayed by the window long after he was gone. The tea had gone cold, but her heart, the one she thought had long since gone silent, was beating again. Slow, fragile, and achingly alive. She whispered into the night. Maybe it's not the land that's barren. Maybe it's the hearts that forgot how to hope. Outside, the wind swept through Bennett Valley, where one woman was learning to trust again, and one man was learning how to open his heart. Part 2. Fire and Dust. That summer came early and harsher than any before. The hills were cracked and yellow grass scorched to brittle straw. Every gust of wind carried the dry scent of dust and heat, curling up red whirlwinds that looked like smoke. The Wyoming sky was too blue, too still, the kind of peace that warned of something coming. Eleanor could feel it. Even the horses grew restless, spooked by the smallest sound. The children still played, laughing in the yard, but Wyatt stood on the porch, eyes narrowed toward the far ridge where a faint haze blurred the horizon. "Something wrong?" Eleanor asked, stepping beside him. "Fire," Wyatt answered, voice low, tense. "West side. If the wind turns, it'll come for us." She froze. Her mind raced the dry hay barn, the kitchen, the wood walls, the small schoolroom, all of it waiting for a spark. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a deep metallic bronze. Smoke seeped into the air, acrid, thick, and heavy. Eleanor looked out the window and her heart stopped. The horizon was burning red. "Wyatt!" she shouted. He ran from the barn, eyes blazing. "Take the kids down to the creek. I'll fight it off at the hayshed." Eleanor grabbed the children's hands and ran. The wind howled, tearing through her hair, flinging dust into her face. Then the sound changed. The wind roared animal-like and the world turned crimson. She looked back. Fire. A wall of flame crawling down the ridge, devouring everything in its path. Tommy fell coughing in the smoke. Eleanor scooped him up, tears cutting through the soot on her face. Behind her came the crash of splintering wood. The horse barn was burning. "Wyatt," she screamed. No answer. Only fire. Only wind. Then a sound. A faint cry swallowed by the roar. June. Her blood ran cold. She spun around and saw the little girl standing frozen on the porch, clutching her ragged doll surrounded by smoke. Eleanor didn't think. She ran. The heat slammed into her like a wave. Smoke clawed down her throat, searing her lungs. Every step was a battle against fire fear and her own frail body. She wrapped a wet blanket around herself and pushed forward. "June, come here, sweetheart." The girl stood frozen, eyes wide, tears streaking through the soot. Eleanor reached her, pulled her close, and the roof cracked above them. A burning beam crashed down, blocking the way. She pushed with everything she had. The fire bit into her arm, the world filled with orange light, then exploded in sound and flame. When Wyatt found them, he was half mad. He stormed into the fire, grabbed Eleanor by the shoulders, dragging her out into the open. She was covered in ash, clutching June tightly against her chest. "Eleanor, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. Her voice was hoarse, broken, but she smiled. "She's safe." Wyatt pulled her into his arms, shaking. "Don't you ever do that again," he choked out. "You have no idea I thought I'd lost you." She didn't answer. She only placed her trembling hand on his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart, the proof that both of them were still alive. The fire raged until dawn. By morning, the valley was covered in ash. The barn was gone, the fields blackened, but somehow the house still stood. Eleanor awoke in the kitchen, her arm bandaged, her skin stinging. Outside, Wyatt sat alone on the porch, watching the pale light rise through smoke. The sun shone weakly through the haze, gilding the lines on his face. The face of a man who had lived too long with loss and had just come close to losing again. She stepped outside, her voice faint. "You don't have to worry. I'm fine." He turned to her eyes, dark, weary, and tender all at once. "I'm not worried for you," he said quietly. "I'm worried for me, if anything had happened to you. I don't think I could survive it." Eleanor said nothing. Only the wind spoke, sweeping over the ashes, carrying the scent of earth smoke and something new. Something fragile but alive. That afternoon, as the children helped clear the debris, Wyatt stood behind her, his voice low and rough. "You saved my child." "Not your child," Eleanor said softly, smiling faintly. "Ours," he replied. She turned toward him, and in his smoke-streaked eyes she saw it, a light faint but real, a promise unspoken yet undeniable. Night fell. The wind whispered across the blackened valley, and in the middle of the scorched ground, a single green shoot pushed through the ash, trembling small but reaching for the light. The fire had devoured everything except what mattered most. It burned away the walls that had kept two lonely hearts apart, and in the ashes of Bennett Valley, love took its first breath. Part 3. The Law Rides. In the first winds of autumn swept through Bennett Valley, carrying the chill of rain-soaked earth. The sky hung low, its light soft and heavy, filtered through a veil of thin mist. The fire was months behind them, but the land still bore its scars, blackened fences, patches of ash where fields once grew green. Yet inside the small wooden house something had changed. A warmth lingered, faint but real, like the last glow of embers refusing to die. Wyatt had grown quieter, more solemn, but the way he looked at Eleanor was no longer distant. And she each morning awoke with a strange, steady peace, the feeling that even a wounded place could be called home. It happened one noon as they were gathered at the table. Eli burst through the door, breathless. "Pa, Mr. Harris from town says, the inspector's coming, they're checking on..." The adoption. Silence fell like a hammer. Even the wind seemed to pause at the windows. Wyatt set his spoon down, fingers tightening around it. "How long?" "2, maybe 3 days. They said they'll decide if you're allowed to keep us." Eleanor glanced at Wyatt. In his eyes she saw it fear, not of punishment, but of losing what little life had finally begun to feel whole. She knew that fear. She had lived it once, the terror of watching something precious slip through her fingers. That afternoon, the ranch came alive. Wyatt fixed the gates, mended fences, cleared the yard. Eleanor scrubbed the floors, washed sheets, straightened every book on the shelf. "We have to make them see this is a family," she told the children. "A place where love lives, where learning and laughter belong." Her voice shook slightly because she knew. The law didn't see love, it saw papers. And love without blood or name was in the eyes of the world a fragile crime. Night fell. The house was still except for the soft rasp of wind at the porch. Eleanor sat mending June's tiny dress, pricking her finger more than once but never stopping. Wyatt leaned against the doorway watching. "You don't have to go through all that trouble," he murmured. "Yes, I do," she replied without looking up. "When they come, they'll see we're not neglecting anyone. They'll see a family worth keeping." Wyatt took a step closer, his voice low, rough. "You're not part of this household, Eleanor. The law might say you don't belong." She lifted her head. Her eyes glowed soft and fierce in the lamplight. "I don't need permission to care. I have a duty. And if we're going to fight, I'd like to look the part." She rose, moving to the small mirror on the wall. Her hands trembled as she pinned her hair and fastened a silver clip, the only piece she'd brought from her old life. In the reflection, she saw not beauty, but resolve. And behind her, Wyatt's reflection, silent, steady, his gaze filled with something unspoken. "If we're going to fight," she whispered, half to him, half to herself, "we'll do it looking proper." The morning of the inspection arrived gray and misty. Wyatt woke early, sweeping the porch, laying out breakfast. Eli buttoned his shirt. Mara folded the tablecloth. Eleanor coached them gently how to greet, how to stand, how to say "yes, sir" with pride. Wyatt came in from the barn wearing a clean white shirt, hair combed. He almost looked like another man, a man walking into battle. "You look ready for war," she teased softly. "And you," he answered, "look like the one who's going to win it." They both smiled faintly, nervously, because behind every smile was the same fear. What if this isn't enough? That evening, after the children had gone to bed, the air hung thick with waiting. Eleanor sat at the small desk, sorting lesson papers. Wyatt passed by, paused, lingered. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Eleanor set her pen down, looked up. Wyatt's eyes met hers. In them she saw worry, gratitude, and something deeper, something neither dared to name. He took a slow step closer. The distance between them dissolved like breath on glass. Under the flickering lamp, their eyes met, steady, searching. No questions, no promises. Just silence, the kind that says, "I see you, I understand." Tomorrow could break them apart, but tonight they were here together. Wyatt reached out his calloused fingers, closing over hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "we face it together." She nodded. Together. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The lamp flickered, and in that trembling light they leaned in their first kiss, slow and honest, the breath of two souls finding refuge. Beyond the window, the wind carried the sound of distant thunder, not a warning of storms, but a promise of morning. For when the law came to test their love, they would stand not as strangers, but as a family already forged in fire. Part 4. The Visit. Morning broke over Bennett Valley. The grass still jeweled with dew, the air smelling of earth and cold sky. Eleanor was brewing tea, the children bent over their lessons. Wyatt tending to the horses. It was a morning that felt calm, too calm, until the echo of hooves shattered the stillness. Heavy, deliberate, like thunder rolling in a clear sky. Two riders appeared on the ridge. One, tall and narrow-shouldered, wore a dark coat and wide-brimmed hat, Inspector Chester Hartley from Laramie County. Beside him rode Marshal Reeves, the law's steady hand in Wyoming. Wyatt's jaw tightened before the men even reached the yard. Hartley dismounted, brushed the dust from his sleeves, and spoke with a clipped metallic tone. "We're here to investigate. There are reports that you've been harboring 4 children without legal guardianship, and that a woman who is not your wife is living under your roof. No greeting, no courtesy. Just words, sharp, cold, and final, cutting through the morning air. Eleanor stood behind the doorway, fingers trembling. She had known this day would come, just not this soon. The questioning began. The children sat in a line, small and silent under Hartley's hard gaze. Name Eli, sir. Where are your parents? I don't have any. Eli's voice shook, but he stood tall. Hartley scribbled in his notebook, moving on. When it came to little June, she froze, eyes glistening, unable to speak. Who is your mother? Hartley asked. His tone was like the snap of a whip. Silence. Wyatt clenched his fists, ready to step forward, but Eleanor was already moving. She knelt, wrapping June in her arms. I am, she said softly. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. I am their mother. Hartley looked up, brows narrowing. You have no birth records, no marriage certificate, no legal claim. By law, you have no right to call yourself that. Eleanor lifted her chin, meeting his gaze head on. Maybe not by law, but I'm the one who teaches them, feeds them, holds them when they're sick, tucks them in when they cry. If that doesn't make me their mother, then tell me what does. The room went utterly still. Even Hartley paused, pen hovering above the page. The inspection lasted all afternoon. Hartley moved through the house, his eyes slicing through every corner, the books, the beds, the old patched blankets. He questioned Wyatt about relations with an unmarried woman, questioned Eleanor about her past, and asked the children about how they were treated. Each question felt like a blade cutting through the fragile peace they had built. Wyatt's hands stayed clenched at his sides. Eleanor's voice shook, but she never looked away. Finally, Hartley stepped onto the porch, writing something in his ledger. Mr. Boone, Miss Grace, he said slowly, I see what looks like a home here, but I also see something improper. Wyatt frowned. What do you mean, a man, 4 children, and an unmarried woman living together? The law calls that a violation of moral conduct. Without legal documentation, these children may be removed to the orphanage in Cheyenne. The words hit like gunfire. The children began to cry. June clung to Eleanor's dress, sobbing. I don't want to go. I want to stay home. Eleanor pulled her close, tears spilling freely now. No one is taking you anywhere, sweetheart. Not while I'm here. Wyatt stepped forward, voice rough with emotion. They're my family. I don't need the law to tell me that. Hartley turned, his expression cold. The law doesn't care about love, Mr. Boone. It cares about order. By the time Hartley and Reeves rode away, dusk had settled. Their hooves faded into the distance, swallowed by the wind. The ranch fell silent again. Inside, the children clung to Eleanor, too afraid to let go. Wyatt stood in the yard, staring at the dark outline of the mountains. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the ghost of old ashes, and with it the ache of helpless anger. Eleanor came to stand beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the quiet sound of the children's crying reached them, soft and distant like a song fading into the wind. Finally, she said, her voice steady, but low. They can take away the papers, but they can't take what's real. Wyatt turned to her, meeting her gaze, and between them there was understanding, wordless but absolute. We'll fight, Eleanor whispered. Even if the law doesn't believe in love, we will. He said nothing, just nodded once and took her hand. His was rough, strong. Hers was small but sure. Together they stood as the sun bled into the horizon, the light glinting off the scorched fields like faded gold. Behind them, shadows stretched long across the earth, and in that twilight between law and love, between fear and faith, a man and a woman stood side by side, ready to defend the only truth they had left their family. Part 5. Under the Rain. That night, the western sky felt as though it had collapsed. Heavy clouds rolled in from the mountains, the wind howling through the cottonwoods, shaking the roof until it groaned. After Inspector Hartley's visit, no one spoke a word. Dinner passed in silence. The children huddled by the hearth, and Wyatt and Eleanor sat on opposite sides of the table, their eyes meeting across the firelight, carrying all the words they couldn't say. When the first drops of rain struck the roof, Eleanor rose and stepped out to the porch. The air smelled of wet dust, burnt grass, and memory. Behind her, the door creaked open. Wyatt stepped out. A heavy coat slung over his shoulders, his face half lost in shadow. Only his eyes caught the glow of the lamp inside. They walked together along the narrow creek behind the house, the water dark and restless beneath the rain. The drops grew harder, colder, striking their faces, their hands. Eleanor tightened her shawl but didn't turn back. "You should go inside," Wyatt said, voice low, gravelly. "It's cold." "I know," she answered softly, "but I can't sleep." He said nothing. The only sounds were the rain on the earth and the echo of two hearts beating through the silence. After a while, Wyatt stopped. He stood still in the rainwater streaming from his hair, his voice barely above the storm. "I'm scared, Eleanor." She turned, startled. The man who had fought fire and loss, who had stood against the law itself, was trembling. "I've lost too much," he said, his voice breaking between breaths. "My wife, my land. And now I'm scared I'll lose them too, the children. You." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. For the first time, she saw not the cowboy carved from stone and silence, but the man beneath, raw, afraid, still bleeding from the past. She stepped closer, laid her hand gently against his chest. His heart was pounding wildly beneath her palm. "If you're afraid of losing," she whispered, "then we'll fight to keep what's ours." Wyatt looked down at her, half in disbelief, half in wonder. "Fight, yes," she said firmly. "If the world won't make room for us, then we'll make our own." A flash of lightning split the sky, turning the valley silver. Eleanor didn't move. Her hand stayed over his heart. She was trembling, though not from the cold. Wyatt caught her wrist and held it there. They looked at each other through the curtain of rain, no more distance, no more words. He pulled her close. The rain fell harder, running down their faces, mixing with tears neither of them would admit to. Eleanor pressed her cheek against his chest, hearing the thunder of his heartbeat, the ragged breath of a man who had carried the world and now only wanted to hold on to one fragile thing: family. "Wyatt," she whispered, "why don't you say something?" He lowered his head, his voice hoarse, nearly breaking. "Because if I start, I won't be able to stop." She looked up, and their faces were so close that one breath would have been enough to bridge the space between them. But Wyatt didn't kiss her. He simply rested his forehead against hers, a touch light as rain, but heavy with everything unspoken. "If the world won't give us mercy," he murmured, voice rough against her ear, "we'll make our own." Eleanor closed her eyes. A single drop rain or tear slid down her cheek. In that moment, she didn't care what tomorrow might bring. All she knew was that her heart was still alive, beating, believing, burning. They stood there for a long time. Rain poured down, the creek murmured, and the valley seemed wrapped in a gray veil of sorrow. But beneath that sorrow, something was being reborn, a love that asked for no permission, only the courage to exist. When they finally returned to the house, soaked to the bone, the children were asleep by the fire. Wyatt tucked the blankets closer around them. Eleanor lit the lamp again. The golden light caught their faces, tired, wet, but calm. She smiled faintly. "You know," she said, "sometimes the things we do out of love are the fiercest kind of fight." Wyatt didn't answer. He only stepped closer, resting his rough hand on her shoulder, a touch quiet but sure, a promise that from now on, neither of them would face the storm alone. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the ashes from the earth. And inside that small house in Bennett Valley, two hearts once lost, once guarded, finally beat as one, steady and strong as the sound of rain upon the roof. Part 6. The Marshal's Verdict. That morning, Bennett Valley held its breath. The sky was unnervingly clear, no fog, no rain, only the pale light spilling across the mountains, washing over the small Boone ranch, like a stage where fate was about to deliver its final line. Eleanor felt it, the stillness, the waiting. Even the children were quiet. Mara sat by the window stitching her doll's torn dress. Eli sharpened his wooden knife. Tommy fidgeted without a word. Little June stayed curled in Eleanor's lap, clutching her ragged doll. Wyatt entered from the yard, his shirt pressed clean, hat in hand, a rare sight that made Eleanor's chest tighten. He set the hat down on the table. His voice was low, solid as stone. "They're coming." Through the shimmering heat, two riders emerged on the dirt road. Inspector Chester Hartley still in his black coat, eyes sharp as blades. And beside him rode Marshal Reeves, the old lawman, who had kept order in Wyoming for a decade. If Hartley was the law, Reeves was the judgment. They dismounted. The silence in the yard grew so heavy it could break. Mr. Boone Hartley began, his voice clipped and cold. "We've returned to deliver the final ruling regarding the custody of the 4 children." Eleanor stood tall, her hand gripping June's tightly. Wyatt stepped beside her. "They're my children," Wyatt said. "Not by blood, not by paper, but by sweat, by sleepless nights, by love. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking to keep my family." Hartley's face remained stone. "Family requires legality, Mr. Boone. The law is the law." Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped forward. "And what about justice?" she asked. Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. "If the law can't see a child being fed, taught, and held when they're afraid, then tell me, who does the law really protect?" Hartley's mouth tightened, as if he'd heard such pleas too many times before. "Emotion cannot replace documentation, Miss Grace." The room, if it could be called one, fell silent. Only the clock ticked, only the wind pressed at the window pane. Then Reeves moved. Slowly the marshal stepped forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He paused by the small desk where Mara had scrawled in uneven letters, "Home is here." Reeves read the words, said nothing. He turned to Eleanor, then Wyatt. His eyes were different, not sharp like Hartley's, but weathered human. The kind that had seen too much loss to mistake love for something else. "You teach them?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir." "And they can read every day?" Reeves nodded once. Then he turned to the children. "Do you want to come with me?" The question fell heavy in the room. Eli shook his head. Mara grabbed Eleanor's hand. Tommy bit his lip, and little June whispered, "No, I want to stay home with Mama and Pa." Eleanor knelt, holding her close, tears streaming freely now. Hartley frowned, ready to speak, but Reeves lifted his hand. "Chester," he said slowly, "we've heard enough." The air stilled. Wyatt and Eleanor stood side by side, hearts pounding. Reeves straightened, his voice filling the space. "By the law," he said, each word deliberate, "these children should be taken. No papers, no marriage, no legal proof of guardianship." Eleanor closed her eyes. Wyatt lowered his head. The silence stretched deep and final. Then Reeves continued, "But justice," he paused, gaze steady on them, "isn't always law." For a moment, no one moved. Then the old marshal exhaled, slow and heavy, as if setting down a burden he'd carried too long. "These children are safe here," he said. "I'll file my report stating that Boone Ranch meets the standards of care. But," his voice softened, "you two ought to do the right thing." Hartley turned sharply. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Reeves looked back at him, then at Wyatt and Eleanor. "I've seen too many homes fall apart because people waited too long to name what they already had. Don't let the law come between what's already yours." He stepped toward the door. The wind caught his coat, swirling dust through the sunlight. At the threshold, he turned one last time. His voice was low, steady kind. "Get married. Make it official." Then he left. The sound of hooves faded down the road until only the wind remained. Inside, the silence broke not with words, but with tears. Mara sobbed. Eli wrapped his arms around Tommy. June ran to Eleanor, clinging to her dress. Wyatt stood still for a long moment. Then he looked at Eleanor. Really looked, and for the first time, his eyes were soft, almost smiling. "Looks like we've just been given a second chance." She laughed through her tears. "Or an order from above." He nodded. "Maybe both." As the sun sank behind the mountains, the valley glowed gold. Eleanor and Wyatt stood on the porch, the children laughing and chasing each other in the yard. No more fear, no more waiting, just two broken souls learning how to stand together. "Wyatt," she whispered, "do you believe in miracles?" "No," he said, smiling faintly, "but I believe in people." He reached for her hand, and there in the red glow of the Wyoming dusk, a promise was made, silent, unspoken, but as real as the land beneath their feet. A promise that love once fought for becomes its own kind of law. Part 7. The Proposal. Dawn broke over Bennett Valley, a pale, golden light spilling across the misty hills. Thin trails of smoke rose from the chimney, mingling with the scent of roasted coffee and toasted bread. After many stormy days, Wyatt Boone's small cabin finally breathed with life again, the soft laughter of children, the patter of hurried feet, the barking of a dog chasing them in the yard. Eleanor stood by the window, her hair hastily tied back, stirring a pot of oatmeal. The sunlight caught her flushed cheeks, and Wyatt couldn't take his eyes off her. He sat at the table, his coffee growing cold, though his heart burned warmly within. Inside that humble wooden room, the only sound he truly heard was the rush of his own heartbeat, fast, uneven, unlike that of a calm cowboy. The children burst in laughter, echoing. Mara carried little June, Eli straightened his chair, and Tommy had already stolen a slice of bread. Everything seemed ordinary, just another morning, but Eleanor sensed something different. There was a depth in Wyatt's gaze, a faraway light she hadn't seen before. When everyone had taken their seats, Wyatt set down his cup and drew a deep breath. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and steady. The kitchen fell silent. She turned, smiling gently. "What is it, Wyatt?" He rose, walked around the table, and stopped in front of her. The children looked on, holding their breath, sensing something was about to happen. Wyatt looked at Eleanor for a long time, the look of a man who had walked through loss and fire, now standing before the only thing he still believed he could hold on to. He knelt. One knee touched the old wooden floor, his hands holding hers. His voice was deep, rough, but unwavering, Eleanor Grace. "I have no ring, no flowers, only this land, 4 children, and the heart you brought back to life." She trembled, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. "What are you doing, Wyatt?" He smiled softly, his eyes warm as the morning sun. "I'm asking you, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air among the smell of coffee, the crackle of bread in the pan, and 4 wide-eyed children waiting in silence. Outside, the sunlight streamed through the window, painting them in gold like a living portrait. Eleanor covered her mouth, stifling a sob. Then she laughed and cried at once. She nodded, tears running down her cheeks, her voice trembling yet clear, filled with joy. "Yes," she whispered. Then again, louder, firmer. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Wyatt stood and pulled her into his arms. The children cheered, clapped, and ran around the table. Mara cried, Eli laughed, Tommy shouted, and June hugged Eleanor's leg, squealing, "Mom's gonna be a bride." Eleanor laughed through her tears, holding them all close. Wyatt looked at them. The woman he loved, the children he called his own, all wrapped in the quiet miracle of one-word family. Outside, the wind swept through the meadow, carrying the sweet scent of wildflowers and new sunlight. Wyatt kissed Eleanor's forehead and whispered, "I once thought my heart died with my first wife, but you brought it back, not with magic, but with kindness." Eleanor's eyes shone like sunlight on water. "And you, Wyatt Boone," she replied softly, "taught me that love isn't just about being born together. It's about choosing each other every single day." The children tugged their hands, leading them outside to where the dawn spread across the dewy grass. They joined hands in a circle, laughing and dancing in the light. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Eleanor heard laughter echoing across the hills. Wyatt turned to her, his hand firm around hers, eyes filled with a promise of forever. "We'll marry right here, under this sky, among the ones who truly are our family." Eleanor nodded. In that moment, every fear, every wall, every doubt melted away. All that remained was them and a new beginning. On the table, the coffee still steamed. But outside, the sun had risen high, blazing gold over Bennett Valley, where a family had just been born, not by paper, but by love. Part 8. The Wedding at the Cottonwood Tree. The afternoon sun bathed Bennett Valley in golden light. The last rays stretched across the meadow where a small creek curved gently, reflecting the amber sky like honey. A soft breeze carried the scent of wild grass, the murmur of water, and the faint aroma of wood smoke from faraway homes. Beneath the old cottonwood tree, once Eleanor's first classroom and the place where she and Wyatt had shared their first long, silent look, strips of white cloth fluttered between two branches. Wildflowers stood in glass jars. A small table, an old Bible, and 4 children, that was all they had for a wedding. And yet, in that simplicity, surrounded by the vastness of the land, everything felt sacred. Wyatt stood beneath the tree in a worn white shirt, its collar frayed. Eleanor walked from the cabin holding a small bouquet of wildflowers the children had just picked. Her hair was loose, a few strands dancing in the wind, her face glowing with joy, though her eyes shimmered with tears. There was no organ, no band, only the wind, the stream, and the heartbeat of those who watched. The children lined up. Mara held the flowers, Tommy grinned from ear to ear, June clutched Eli's hand. Sheriff Reeves stood before them, his eyes softening at the sight of the couple. "I once told you," he said gently, "that justice isn't always the same as the law. Today I'm glad to see love proving that truth." As Wyatt and Eleanor clasped hands, Eli, the eldest, stepped forward. He lifted his chin, his voice trembling yet strong. "Sir," he said to Reeves, "if someone needs to give her away, no one deserves it more than we do. We give her. We choose her to be our ma." Silence. No one could hold back tears. Eleanor sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around all 4 children. Her tears soaked into their hair, salty like the pain she'd endured, sweet like the joy now blooming in her chest. Behind them, Wyatt's eyes glistened. The cowboy who had once fought against fate itself now bowed his head, fists clenched, trying to keep his overflowing heart contained. When all grew still, Reeves spoke solemnly. "Wyatt Boone, do you promise to protect this woman through storm and calm until your final day?" "I do," Wyatt said, his voice low and steady like the voice of the earth itself. "Eleanor Grace, do you promise to love, to teach, and to stand beside this man, keeping this family safe, even if the world turns against you?" "I do," she whispered, eyes alight like fire. Reeves nodded, smiling. "Then beneath this cottonwood tree, before the western wind, before God and before these children, I pronounce you husband and wife." Wyatt turned to Eleanor. He placed his hands on her cheeks and murmured, so only she could hear, "We've been a family long before this day." Then he kissed her, a long, gentle kiss that held everything they'd lost and found again. Mara wept. Tommy cheered. June laughed, and Eli turned away, hiding the tear that sparkled in the sunlight. Eleanor's arms circled Wyatt's neck, feeling the warmth of him, the scent of leather and smoke, the wild wind of the plains. And for the first time she felt no longer adrift. She was home. The children danced around them, tossing petals of wildflowers into the air. The breeze caught them, spinning them into golden spirals in the fading light. Wyatt laughed, a rare sound, then lifted June high, spinning her as her laughter echoed across the valley. Eleanor watched her hand over her heart, feeling it beat in time with the joy around her. Reeves tipped his hat and said softly, "Justice served in the only way that matters." As dusk settled, the family gathered around a wooden table in the yard. They ate cornbread, drank apple cider, and sang old Western songs. No grand feast, no fireworks, just laughter voices and the glow of lantern light. Above them, the sky bloomed with 1,000 stars. Eleanor looked up and whispered, "If anyone ever asks what true love looks like, I'll tell them it looks like this, simple, dusty, and breathtakingly beautiful." Wyatt rested a hand on her shoulder, his gaze steady, gentle as the western soil. "And it will stay," he said quietly, "forever." Part 9. The Fever Night. That night, Bennett Valley lay heavy under the breath of summer heat. No wind, no clouds, only a sky the color of molten copper. Crickets sang beyond the porch, their soft rhythm blending with the crackle of wood in the stove. Everything seemed peaceful until a faint cry rose from the attic where the children slept. Ma. Eleanor bolted upright, her heart tightening. She ran up the wooden stairs, the lantern in her hand, trembling. June lay curled beneath the blankets, her face flushed crimson, her hair damp with sweat, her breathing shallow. She looked so small, like a broken doll trembling in the heat. Wyatt came running. "What is it?" he asked, breathless. Eleanor placed her palm on June's forehead. The heat burned her skin. "Fever," she said, voice tight. "It's high, too high." She began to cool the child with warm cloths, wiping her small body with gentle hands. Wyatt stood nearby, his fingers shaking, eyes wide with fear. The scene was too familiar. 3 years ago, his wife Clara had burned with the same fever in this same bed. 3 days later, she was gone, leaving him and 4 lost children behind in the prairie wind. Wyatt's breath quickened. He staggered back, his shoulders trembling. "Eleanor, I can't." She looked up, firm but calm. "Yes, you can. This isn't Clara. This is June, and she'll make it if we stay here together." Wyatt didn't answer, but he didn't move away. In the soft glow of the oil lamp, sweat darkened his shirt, his face carved by shadows of memory and fear. All through the night, Eleanor stayed by June's side. She changed the cloths, measured medicine, whispered stories to keep the child from drifting too far away. Her voice trembled with exhaustion, but stayed steady in rhythm. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named June, small as a raindrop, but strong as the prairie wind. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant mountains. A summer storm was coming, lightning flashing through the small attic window. In that brief light, Eleanor saw June's lips move, heard the faintest whisper, "Don't leave me, Mama." Everything stopped. Eleanor gripped the tiny hand tighter, tears spilling freely. "Never," she whispered back, her voice breaking. "I'm right here." Wyatt sat in the corner, head bowed. He watched them, the woman fighting fate itself and the little girl trapped between life and loss. Memories crashed over him. Clara's last breath, his helplessness, the cries of his children. He couldn't bear it. He rose, stumbled outside. Cold wind hit his face. Rain lashed down like whips. He tilted his head to the heavens and shouted into the storm, "Don't take her. Please, God, don't take anyone else." His voice was swallowed by thunder, but his plea rose with the wind, desperate, raw, human. Inside, Eleanor sat still, clutching June's hand. The oil lamp flickered low, nearly gone. She prayed in broken whispers, "Please let her live. I can't lose anyone else." Mara and Tommy stood silently at the door. Eli, the eldest, came forward, took the damp cloth and helped wipe his sister's forehead. He didn't speak, but his eyes shone in the weak light, the eyes of a child who had learned to grow up too soon. Hours crawled by. Then a breath slower, calmer. June's fever eased. Eleanor placed her hand on the girl's brow and felt it warmth but no longer burning. She sagged with relief, tears falling this time from gratitude. The door creaked open. Wyatt stepped in, drenched from the rain. He looked at his daughter, then at Eleanor, unable to speak. "She'll be all right," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with exhaustion and grace. He sat beside her, lowering his head to her shoulder. His rough hand found hers. No words were needed. They both knew tonight they had crossed the thin line between despair and a miracle. Dawn crept through the fogged windows, golden light spilling across June's bed. The little girl stirred, her voice hoarse and small. Ma Eleanor clasped her hand instantly. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." Wyatt leaned down, pressing a trembling kiss to her forehead. In the corner, Eli watched quietly. Then, for the first time, he stepped forward, hesitated, and wrapped his arms around Eleanor. "Thank you, Ma." Eleanor froze for a heartbeat, then returned the embrace, tears flowing once more, not from fear but from the quiet truth that she was finally their mother. When the sun rose fully, the room was bathed in warmth. June slept peacefully in Eleanor's arms, Wyatt sitting close by, a faint smile on his lips. In the hush of morning, they knew the worst was behind them, and peace had come again. Outside, the summer wind carried the scent of rain-soaked earth, the scent of life renewed. The sky stretched wide and blue as if the storm had never been. Eleanor looked out the window and whispered to herself, "Everyone has a miracle. Mine is being here, with them." Wyatt took her hand, his gaze full of quiet gratitude. No vows were needed, no words at all, just a hand held tight and a love that had already spoken everything. Part 10. 1 year later. A year had passed. Summer returned to Bennett Valley, but this time there was no smoke, no storm, no fear. The fields had turned green again. Fences stood strong and straight, and beneath the old cottonwood where their simple wedding had taken place, laughter now bloomed like sunlight. Eleanor stood on the porch, her white cotton dress dusted with flour, her hair tied up neatly. Outside, the children ran circles around Wyatt, laughter filling the air. Mara chased Tommy with a straw hat. June carried wildflowers, and Eli worked to fix the kite the wind had just torn down. Everything was alive, noisy, and peaceful, as if the storms had never been. On the wooden table, between cups of coffee and jars of wildflowers, lay a sun-faded paper, the official marriage and guardianship certificate of Wyatt Boone and Eleanor Grace. A small sheet, but it carried the weight of a year's worth of battles against the law, against the past, and against fear itself. That afternoon, they gathered under the Cottonwood Tree once more. Reeves, now retired, kept his promise and returned to lead their first anniversary ceremony. The wind rustled through the leaves, the sunlight spilling down in golden flakes over hair of brown, gold, and red. Eleanor looked around. The whole town had come. Mr. Harris, the blacksmith, the Reeds. Even those who once doubted them were smiling now. Wyatt stood beside her in his old white shirt, his eyes bright with pride. Reeves raised his glass, his voice echoing softly through the valley. A year ago they married beneath this tree. No gold, no diamond rings. Only love, courage, and faith. Today they are not just husband and wife. They are proof that even in the harshest land, kindness can grow like grass after the rain. Applause burst forth. Mara and Tommy cheered and danced, while June placed a small bouquet at the tree's roots. Wyatt turned to Eleanor, smiling faintly. His voice was deep, warm. "We used to think we married to save the children, but the truth is they saved us." The words caught in Eleanor's throat. She looked at him, the man who was once all steel and silence, now soft as a sunset. She squeezed his hand, nodded, and said nothing. The children played around them, laughter soaring into the sky. Eli's kite flew high, higher still, tugging at its string like a dream. Tommy tried to hold it steady. Mara ran to help, and June sat under the tree, weaving flower crowns for Mama and Pa. Eleanor watched them, her heart overflowing with something she couldn't name. A year ago, she had been a lonely woman carrying the ache of never bearing a child. Now she was the mother of 4, the wife of a man who had once feared love, the soul of a home built not on blood, but on faith and affection. She tilted her face to the sky, tears falling through her smile. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers to her chest. Wyatt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his voice low against her ear. "No crying today," he teased gently. She laughed softly through her tears. "I'm not crying. I'm just grateful." He kissed the top of her head, and together they watched their children run through the golden light. The sun sank behind the mountains, leaving a soft glow over the valley. June ran to Eleanor, holding up a flower crown. "Mama, this is your crown." She placed it gently on Eleanor's head and declared, "Now you're the queen of Bennett Valley." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Wyatt knelt beside Eleanor, his eyes glimmering. "You hear that?" he murmured. "My queen." Eleanor smiled, whispering back just loud enough for him to hear. "I don't need to wish. Everything I ever wanted is right here." Wyatt leaned in, kissed her forehead, and held her hand, a promise without words, one they had already kept for a year. Above them, the last of the sunset faded into the first stars. The children's laughter mingled with the stream. the wind and the quiet heartbeat of those who had finally found home, not in walls of wood and stone, but in each other. As twilight deepened, the sun cast its final glow over the valley, gilding the grass and the porch in soft gold. Eleanor leaned against Wyatt's shoulder. In the distance, the children chased each other through the tall grass, their laughter drifting on the breeze, mingling with the scent of horses and summer hay. It was peace, pure and simple. She whispered, voice as soft as the wind, "If anyone ever asks what love in the West looks like, I'll tell them it doesn't bloom among roses. It grows between stones, among dust and through the storms." Wyatt smiled, his hand closing around hers, his gaze deep and steady as the red earth. "And even when the wind comes," he said, "it endures, because some hearts are strong enough to believe in it." The wind rose, carrying golden dust through the fading light. Beneath the cottonwood, its leaves shimmered like silent blessings. The scene was simple, yet within it lived a year of storms and healing, a love reborn from ruin. In the Wild West, love does not bloom among roses. It grows between stones, through dust, and in the storm. Wild West US tells stories like these of men who are silent but steadfast, and women who dare to love, to live, to believe again. This isn't just a story about love. It's a story about faith, about broken souls finding warmth again, about how one touch can make even the desert gentle. In the West, love needs no promises, only the courage to stay and the strength to never let go. If you felt something tonight, don't scroll yet. Comment your favorite moment, share this story, and remember, in every storm there's a cowboy waiting to hold the line. Above, the stars began to bloom. Below, the Boone family gathered around the fire, and Eleanor leaned against the man she once only dreamed of. In that moment, no words were needed, for every wish, every loss, every longing had finally found its way home. Night settled. The wind carried laughter into the distance. The West was quiet again. But in that quiet land, one thing remained: love, strong, honest, and eternal like the West itself.